The final document lay on the polished mahogany table, a single sheet of paper that represented the end of a decade. To Clara, it was a victory banner. To her father, Marcus, who sat beside her with an air of regal satisfaction, it was the correction of a regrettable family investment. To Liam, it was merely the last piece of a carefully constructed facade, a final, flimsy wall he was about to let them knock down themselves. Clara thought she was winning. She believed she was stripping him of everything valuable, leaving him with the scraps of their shared life. She didn't know that the scraps she was so disdainfully leaving him, a building she called his monument to failure, had already been sold. She didn't know that within 5 minutes, her world, built on the bedrock of her father's money and her own unshakable arrogance, would be reduced to rubble. The check for $4.4 million was already in his account. This meeting wasn't an execution, it was an unveiling. It's a story about the difference between perceived value and true worth, a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. We've all felt underestimated at some point, haven't we? If you enjoy seeing patience and integrity win the day, I think you'll like this story. Do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to that cold, quiet room, just moments before the storm. The air in the lawyer's office was sterile, chilled to a temperature that discouraged lingering. It smelled of expensive paper and faint, citrus-scented cleaning fluid. On one side of the vast table sat Clara, radiant and sharp in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than Liam's first car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant twist, accentuating the triumphant curve of her lips. Beside her, Marcus Thorne sat like a king holding court, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his bespoke suit a silent testament to generations of unearned confidence. He wasn't just a father supporting his daughter. He was a chairman of the board ratifying a decision he had championed from the start. On the other side sat Liam. He wore a simple navy blazer and gray trousers, neat but unremarkable. He looked, he knew, exactly as they saw him, diminished, quiet, and defeated. His lawyer, a kind, older man named Arthur, who specialized in amicable resolutions, looked deeply uncomfortable, as if he sensed the sheer predator-prey dynamic in the room was anything but amicable. "So, we are all in agreement," Clara's lawyer, a man with a reptilian smile named Mr. Graves announced, his voice smooth and final. "Mrs. Thorne, soon to be Miss Thorne once more, will retain ownership of the 4 residential rental properties on North Elm Street and their associated income streams. Mr. Davies will retain the commercial property known as the Ashworth Building, located at 1590 Industrial Avenue." He said the address with a barely concealed sneer, as if the street name itself were an insult. Clara let out a small, theatrical sigh of relief. "Thank God that's settled," she said, addressing the room but looking only at her father. "I can finally move forward. Those Elm Street units need a competent hand. They've been dreadfully mismanaged." The barb was aimed directly at Liam, who had overseen the properties for the last 3 years. He had increased their profitability by 17%, a fact he documented in meticulous spreadsheets she'd never bothered to read. He didn't react. He simply kept his hands resting on his lap, his posture calm. Inside the breast pocket of his blazer, his fingers brushed against the corner of a folded, thick document. The contact was a small, secret comfort, a hidden reservoir of strength. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his eyes, the same cold blue as his daughter's, fixing on Liam. "It's the most sensible arrangement," he declared, his voice a low rumble of authority. "Clara understands assets. She knows how to cultivate value. It's in her blood." The implication hung in the air, and it wasn't in Liam's. "You," he continued, gesturing vaguely in Liam's direction, "are better suited for projects, hobbies." The word hobbies was the final twist of the knife. The Ashworth building had been his project for 2 years. A sprawling, derelict brick warehouse in a part of the city the rest of the world had forgotten. It was a skeletal ruin of broken windows and graffiti-scarred walls. Clara had despised it from the moment he'd used a small inheritance to acquire it. To her, it was an eyesore, a public declaration of his poor judgment. The beginning of the end had not been a fiery argument, but a quiet, chillingly polite dinner at her parents' estate 6 months prior. It was a sprawling Tudor-style mansion with manicured gardens that seemed to stretch for miles. The dining room was an exercise in oppressive grandeur, with a chandelier that dripped crystals like frozen tears and portraits of stern-faced ancestors judging every bite. Liam had always felt like an exhibit in that room, the middle-class husband on display. That night, Clara had waited for the dessert plates to be cleared before she made her announcement. She hadn't looked at him. She'd addressed her father. "Daddy," she'd said, her voice as smooth and cold as the sorbet they'd just eaten. "Liam and I are separating. I've decided it's for the best." Liam had frozen, the spoon halfway to his mouth. There had been no discussion, no warning. He looked at her, searching for some flicker of emotion, some hint of the woman he had married. He found nothing but a polished, impenetrable surface. Marcus had simply nodded, as if Clara had just announced she was changing her hair color. "I see," he'd said, placing his napkin on the table. He then turned his gaze to Liam, and for the first time, Liam saw not just condescension, but genuine disdain. "I can't say I'm surprised. Some things are simply not meant to be. A partnership requires equal ambition." Her mother, a woman who had faded into the background of her own life years ago, had simply wrung her hands and offered a weak, fluttering smile that didn't reach her eyes. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Liam felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on him, expecting him to argue, to plead, to make a scene. He did none of those things. He placed his own spoon down, carefully and quietly, next to his plate. He took a sip of water. "If that is your decision, Clara," he said, his voice even, "then I will respect it." His calmness seemed to infuriate her more than any outburst would have. Her eyes narrowed. "Respected? Liam, this isn't a negotiation. This is what's happening. My lawyer will be in touch with yours." She had said yours, as if she doubted he even had one. He had simply nodded. "I understand." Now, sitting in this office, that same infuriating calmness served as his only armor. Clara was mistaking his silence for weakness, his stillness for defeat. It was the same mistake she had been making for 10 years. She saw a quiet architect who preferred drafting tables to boardrooms, a man who found more joy in restoring an old piece of furniture than in networking at a country club. She had never once considered that his quietness was not an absence of ambition, but a different kind of ambition altogether. The kind that moved silently, observed patiently, and built foundations on ground others had dismissed as worthless. "Well, Liam?" Mr. Graves prompted, sliding the signature page and a pen toward him. "Shall we conclude this?" Liam looked at the paper. He looked at Clara's smug, expectant face. He looked at Marcus, who was already checking the time on his gold watch, eager to move on to more important matters. The whole scene felt like a play he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. He knew his lines, he knew their lines, and he knew the shocking plot twist that was about to bring the whole production to a grinding halt. He let the silence stretch for a moment longer, savoring the last few seconds of their blissful ignorance. He picked up the pen. Clara's smile widened. He held it over the paper, a breath away from the dotted line. And then he set it down again, perfectly parallel to the edge of the document. "Actually," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the table with absolute clarity, "there's one small detail we need to discuss before I sign." The asset division meeting felt like a public auction where Liam was the only item being sold off for parts. Clara, guided by her father's aggressive financial ethos, had laid claim to everything that glittered. The 4 rental units on North Elm Street were a portfolio of quiet success. They were handsome, three-story brick townhouses in a gentrifying neighborhood, each divided into two spacious apartments. Liam had personally overseen their renovation 5 years ago, preserving the historic charm while modernizing the interiors. They were consistently occupied, generated a steady and significant income, and were by any measure the crown jewels of their shared investments. The Elm Street properties represent a stable, long-term asset, Clara had argued to the lawyers weeks before, her voice dripping with manufactured business acumen. They require active, professional management, which, as you know, is my background. Her background was a degree in art history and a 2-year stint as a junior marketing associate at her father's firm, a position he had created for her. But in her mind, she was a real estate magnate in the making. Liam had not contested it. When Arthur, his lawyer, had protested that a 50-50 split of the rental income was the standard, Liam had gently waved him off. "Let her have them," he'd said in private. "The income, the management, all of it." Arthur had been flabbergasted. "Liam, that's nearly 80% of your shared liquid assets. You're leaving yourself with, well, with that warehouse." And then there was the warehouse, the Ashworth building. It stood on a desolate corner in the city's long-neglected industrial South Side, a hulking brick carcass left over from a bygone era. Its windows were a collection of jagged voids in plywood patches. Weeds grew thick and tenacious from cracks in the foundation. A faded sign hanging precariously from a single rusted bolt read, "Ashworth Textiles," its letters ghosted by decades of sun and rain. The city had officially slapped a notice of condemnation on its door 2 years ago, a bright orange sticker that served as a final, official declaration of its worthlessness. To Clara, the building was more than just a bad investment. It was a personal affront. It was a physical manifestation of everything she disliked about Liam. His tendency to see potential where she saw decay, his patient, methodical nature that she mistook for inaction, his infuriating disregard for appearances. "That thing," she'd said during one of their valuation meetings, gesturing dismissively at a photo of the building, "is a money pit. It's a blight. Frankly, I want my name as far away from it as possible. He bought it, he can keep it." The official appraisal had valued the Ashworth building at land value only, and even that was depressed due to the projected costs of demolition and environmental remediation. The number on the page was so low it was almost comical. Marcus had openly laughed when he saw it. $120,000, he had scoffed, shaking his head. "And that's probably generous. Liam, you'd have been better off taking that inheritance money of yours and lighting a bonfire with it. At least that would have provided some temporary warmth." Liam had absorbed the insult without a flinch. He sat at the table, his expression placid. He simply agreed. "Yes, the appraisal seems correct based on the current state of the property. I'll take the Ashworth building." Clara had exchanged a look with her father, a shared glance of triumphant pity. They were witnessing the final act of a fool, a man so beaten down he was gratefully accepting a pittance, a liability, just to be done with it all. She felt a surge of magnanimity, the kind a queen feels when bestowing a crust of bread upon a beggar. "Fine," she declared. "Let the record show I am relinquishing all claims to the Ashworth property. I want nothing to do with it." Her lawyer had dutifully made a note, formalizing her abandonment of the asset. And in that moment, Liam had felt a profound sense of calm settle over him. She had done it. She had, with her own words, handed him the keys to his new life. What she didn't know was that the Ashworth building's worth had nothing to do with its broken windows or crumbling mortar. Its value was in its location, its size, and most importantly, its zoning classification. Liam, a trained architect with a specialization in urban redevelopment, had seen it from the very beginning. While Clara and her father saw a forgotten industrial wasteland, Liam had spent hundreds of hours at the city planning department studying proposed infrastructure projects, long-term development blueprints, and zoning variance applications. He knew that a new light rail line was slated to have a station 3 blocks away. He knew that the city, desperate to revitalize the South Side, had created a special economic zone offering massive tax incentives for tech and bioscience companies. And he knew that the Ashworth building, with its vast, open-plan interior and robust old-world construction, was not a candidate for demolition. It was a perfect candidate for adaptive reuse. While Clara was picking out new furniture for what she was already calling her townhouses, Liam was meeting with structural engineers. While she was lunching with friends and complaining about his lack of drive, he was in quiet negotiations with a consortium of developers. And a month before Clara's dinner party ambush, he had signed a preliminary agreement with the Phoenix Group, a fast-growing tech firm looking for a unique flagship campus. Now back in the lawyer's office, the finality of it all was breathtaking. Clara felt a genuine thrill. She had successfully shed the one thing that had been holding her back, her painfully average husband. She was now the sole proprietor of a lucrative real estate portfolio. She was a thorn again, in spirit if not yet in name, a woman of substance and vision. She looked at Liam, expecting to see a flicker of regret, of sorrow, of envy. She saw nothing, just that unnerving placidity. It was like looking at the surface of a deep, dark lake. You knew something was down there, but you couldn't begin to guess what it was. "Come on, Liam," she urged, a note of impatience creeping into her voice. "Let's not drag this out. Sign the paper. Let's both get on with our lives." He met her gaze. "Our lives," he repeated softly. The words hung in the air, imbued with a weight only he understood. "Yes, I think it's time for that." He reached into his briefcase, which sat on the floor beside his chair. It was an old, worn leather case he'd had since college. Clara had tried to get him to replace it a dozen times, calling it shabby. But inside that shabby case, nestled between mundane files, was a bound document, its cover a pristine, glossy white. It was the finalized sales contract for the Ashworth building. He didn't take it out. Not yet. First, he had to let them fully appreciate the depth of their mistake. His hand rested on the briefcase, his fingers tracing the outline of the treasure within, a silent promise to himself. The humiliation had been the price of admission. The vindication was about to begin. The weeks between the divorce announcement and the final signing were a masterclass in subtle cruelty, a period of sustained, low-grade humiliation that Liam endured with a stoicism that Clara and her family mistook for weakness. They had to maintain appearances, of course. A messy public split would be unseemly, so they attended a handful of previously scheduled social functions as a couple, a final, awkward victory lap for Clara. The worst of these was the annual charity gala for the city's art museum, an event Marcus Thorne chaired. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a sea of tuxedos, designer gowns, and blinding jewelry. For Liam, it was a shark tank. He stood beside Clara near the grand staircase, a ghost in a rented tuxedo, while she held court. "Clara, darling, you look absolutely stunning." A woman with unnaturally tight skin gushed, ignoring Liam completely. "We've missed you." "I've been occupied," Clara said, her voice carrying a hint of dramatic weariness. "Tying up loose ends. You know how it is. Sometimes you have to prune the dead branches to let the tree grow." She glanced at Liam for a fraction of a second, a tiny, malicious flicker in her eyes. The other woman caught the look and offered a conspiratorial smile. Liam took a sip of his club soda, the ice cubes clinking softly against the glass. He felt like an architectural model in a presentation, a static, silent object meant to represent something that was about to be demolished. People would glance at him, their eyes full of a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, before turning their full attention to Clara, the exciting new project. Later in the evening, Marcus found him near the silent auction tables. He clapped a heavy hand on Liam's shoulder, a gesture that was less friendly and more proprietary, like a butcher handling a cut of meat. "Liam," he began, his voice low and confidential, "I want you to know There are no hard feelings on my end. Business is business. Relationships are, well, they're investments. Some pay dividends, some don't. You just didn't work out. I appreciate the sentiment, Marcus, Liam replied, his tone perfectly neutral. Look, Marcus continued, steering him toward a slightly more private corner, away from the glittering crowd. Clara told me about the asset arrangement. You taking that old wreck of a building off her hands. It's the right thing to do. Shows character. He paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But let's be frank. You're walking away with next to nothing. A man needs a foundation. Ambition. There it was again. That word. Ambition. To Marcus, ambition was a noisy, flashy thing. It was hostile takeovers, luxury cars, and having your name on a building. Liam's quiet, methodical work was invisible to him. I have a foundation, Marcus, Liam said softly. Marcus chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. A foundation of bricks and pigeon droppings. Listen, I'm prepared to be generous. Once this is all signed and done, I'll write you a check. Say $50,000. A clean break. A chance for you to start over somewhere else, somewhere more your speed. It was a bribe and an insult wrapped in a package of false generosity. He wasn't just offering money, he was trying to buy Liam's disappearance. He wanted to erase the mistake, to ensure the man his daughter had married wouldn't be a lingering embarrassment in their social circles. Liam looked at the man who had been his father-in-law for a decade. He saw the complete, unshakable certainty in his eyes. Marcus truly believed he was doing Liam a favor, that he was the benevolent king offering a golden handshake to a dismissed courtier. The dramatic irony was so thick, Liam could almost taste it. $50,000. The offer was less than the commission fee on the Ashworth sale. It was a rounding error. Thank you for the offer, Marcus, Liam said, his voice remaining steady, betraying none of the swirling emotions inside him. But I won't be needing it. I have my own plans. Marcus's expression hardened. His generosity, having been rejected, instantly curdled into irritation. Your own plans? Don't be a fool, son. Pride is a luxury for men who can afford it. You are not one of them. Take the deal. It's the last one you'll get from this family. He turned and walked away, leaving Liam standing alone by a display of overpriced spa weekends. The humiliation was sharp, but clean. It was a clarifying moment. Marcus and Clara weren't just condescending. They were fundamentally incapable of seeing him for who he was. Their worldview was so narrow, so defined by brand names and bank balances, that they had no framework to understand a man like him. And that blindness was his greatest asset. In the nights that followed, while Clara slept soundly in their master bedroom, he had moved into the guest room the night of the announcement. Liam worked. He would slip out of the house, the quiet click of the front door a secret proclamation of his freedom. He drove his modest sedan not to a bar to drown his sorrows, but to the south side. He wouldn't go into the Ashworth building itself. The deal was done. The property was no longer truly his to enter. Instead, he would park across the street, under the flickering orange glow of a lone streetlight. He'd sit there for an hour at a time, looking at the dark, silent structure. He wasn't seeing the decay. He was seeing the digital renderings he had spent months creating. He saw the crumbling brick facade replaced with a curtain wall of gleaming glass, reflecting the sky. He saw the graffiti-covered loading docks transformed into a landscaped public plaza with benches in trees. He saw light pouring into the cavernous interior, illuminating open-concept workspaces where hundreds of people would one day invent the future. He had seen this vision with perfect clarity from the day he first stood before it. He had become an architect because he loved the logic of it, the act of creating something strong and beautiful and useful from nothing but an idea and raw materials. He loved the integrity of a well-drawn plan, the way a foundation determined the strength of the entire structure. His marriage to Clara had been built on a faulty foundation, on her assumption that he would remold himself to fit her world. He had tried for a time. He'd worn the clothes, attended the parties, and smiled at the condescending jokes, but he had never changed his core structure. Now he was applying the principles of his profession to his life. He had identified the decaying structure, his marriage. He had drawn up a new plan. He had secured the financing, quietly and brilliantly, and he was about to begin demolition. Sitting in his car, looking at the silent building, he felt a profound sense of peace. They thought they were leaving him in the ruins. They didn't understand he had been building a palace right under their noses. The offer from Marcus Thorne was a pivotal moment for Liam. It wasn't just an insult, it was a diagnosis of the Thorne family's core pathology. They believed money could solve any problem, erase any inconvenience, and define any person's worth. The $50,000 offer was a clear signal. Liam was, in their eyes, an inconvenience worth $50,000 to remove. The rejection of that offer was not an act of pride, as Marcus had assumed, but an act of self-worth. Liam knew his value, and it wasn't negotiable, especially not with people who were incapable of understanding the currency he dealt in: integrity, patience, and vision. In the wake of that conversation, Marcus's role shifted from a passive, disdainful observer to an active enabler of Clara's campaign. He saw Liam's refusal not as a sign of hidden strength, but as a foolish, stubborn last stand. He was determined to help his daughter crush it, and in doing so, prove the futility of defying the Thorne way of the world. He began to advise Clara on the divorce proceedings, which was akin to letting a shark advise a swimmer on the best route to shore. "You must be firm, Clara," he'd instructed her over lunch at his club, a place so steeped in old money that the leather chairs seemed to sigh with entitlement. "Don't let sentimentality cloud your judgment. This is a business transaction. You are dissolving a failed partnership. The goal is to maximize your return." "I am, Daddy," Clara had assured him, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "I'm taking the Reynolds. He can have his precious pile of rubble. He seems to think it's some kind of diamond in the rough." She laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound. "Let him," Marcus had said with a wave of his hand. "Fools and their follies. It will keep him occupied while you secure the real assets. I've had my people look at the projections for the North Elm neighborhood. With the new bistro opening and the boutique hotel planned, the value of those properties is set to increase by 20% in the next 3 years. You've done well." This praise from her father was the only validation Clara had ever truly craved. She preened under it, her confidence swelling. She felt savvy, powerful, a worthy heiress to the Thorne empire. She began to see the divorce not as the end of a relationship, but as her first major solo business victory. Liam was not her husband. He was the competition she was about to bankrupt. Her behavior toward Liam took on a new, sharper edge. She was no longer just dismissive. She was openly pitying. She would leave brochures for rental apartments in affordable neighborhoods on the kitchen counter. She once, helpfully, suggested he look into a job with a commercial construction firm, adding, "They're always looking for people to, supervise. It's steady work." The condescension was breathtaking. He was a licensed architect with a portfolio of award-winning designs from before he'd stepped back to support her ventures. Yet she spoke to him as if he were an unskilled laborer. Liam absorbed it all. Each condescending remark, each pitying glance, was another log on a fire he was tending with immense patience. He knew that the heat of that fire would not be used for vengeance, but for forging. It was forging his resolve, clarifying his purpose. He was not just securing his own future, he was holding up a mirror to theirs. A mirror they would be forced to look into very, very soon. One afternoon, about a week before the final signing, Liam was in his home office, packing his books into boxes. It was a room Clara had always hated, filled with what she called clutter: architectural histories, books on urban planning, rolls of old blueprints. To Liam, it was the sanctuary of his mind. He was carefully wrapping a framed photograph of his first solo project, a beautifully restored public library, when Clara appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, a look of detached amusement on her face. "Spring cleaning?" she asked. "Just getting organized," he replied without looking up. "I spoke to Daddy today," she went on, ignoring his response. "He's so pleased with how I've handled this. He said I have a real instinct for business." She paused, waiting for a reaction. When none came, she pressed on. "He's worried about you, you know. We both are. That's why he made you that offer. It was a kindness, Liam." Liam finally stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He saw the woman he had once loved, the vibrant, passionate art student who had been fascinated by his talk of structure and form. But that woman was gone, buried under layers of entitlement and arrogance, suffocated by her father's toxic definition of success. "A kindness," he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Is that what you call it? Buying someone's departure?" "It was a safety net," she retorted, her voice rising. "Something to land on after this." "What are you going to do, Liam? Live in that warehouse? Use the bricks as furniture? You have no income, no prospects. You're walking away with nothing." "I have the building," he said simply. The sheer simplicity of his statement, the lack of fight in his tone, was what broke her composure. "The building!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet house. "It's not an asset, you idiot. It's a hole. It's a condemned, worthless, rat-infested pile of garbage that you were too stupid and stubborn to get rid of when you had the chance. And now it's all you have. I hope you're happy. I hope you and your monument to failure will be very happy together." She turned and stormed out, her sharp footsteps echoing down the hall. The phrase, "monument to failure," hung in the air. It was the most honest thing she had said in months. It was exactly what she believed. Liam stood motionless for a long moment. He looked at the framed photo in his hands. The library, a place of knowledge, community, and quiet strength. He had built that. He had taken a neglected building and given it a new purpose, a new life. He was doing it again now, on a much grander scale. Clara's tirade hadn't hurt him. On the contrary, it had solidified his resolve. She and her father weren't just mistaken about a single property. They were fundamentally wrong about the nature of value itself. They saw worth only in things that were already polished, already profitable, already approved by their peers. They had no vision for potential, no patience for transformation. Their world was small, shiny, and ultimately fragile. His was built on a different foundation altogether, a foundation they could not see and therefore could not touch. He carefully placed the photo in the box and sealed the lid. The packing was almost done. The final week before the signing was a study in contrasts. Clara was a whirlwind of triumphant activity. Her life, as she broadcasted on social media and in breathless phone calls to her friends, was a thrilling ascent. She posted photos of herself taking charge at the North Elm properties, pointing authoritatively at a light fixture while a beleaguered handyman looked on. She hosted a freedom brunch for her inner circle, where they toasted her new beginning with expensive champagne, the crystal flutes ringing like tiny victory bells. She was not just moving on, she was launching. Her confidence was absolute, bolstered by her father's constant affirmation and the sycophantic praise of her friends. She had successfully navigated the treacherous waters of divorce and emerged not just unscathed, but wealthier, more powerful, and, in her own eyes, more admirable. She had shed her dead weight, a term she'd used in a call to her best friend, one Liam had unintentionally overheard, and was now free to soar. The narrative she was constructing was perfect. Liam, meanwhile, moved through those same days with a preternatural calm. While Clara was broadcasting her life, he was consolidating his. He packed his books, his drafting tools, his clothes. He worked with a quiet, methodical efficiency that was the hallmark of his nature. Each object placed in a box, each drawer emptied, was a small, deliberate step toward his own new beginning. He felt no anger, no bitterness. The time for those emotions had passed. Now there was only a sense of profound, quiet anticipation, the feeling an architect gets just before the groundbreaking on a project years in the planning. He spent one last evening at the Ashworth building. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the industrial landscape. The sky was a blaze of orange and purple, a spectacle of natural grandeur that made the decaying structures below seem almost noble. He didn't park across the street this time. He had the keys to the main gate, given to him by the Phoenix Group's project manager. He walked through the gate and stood in the vast, paved lot, the place he had envisioned as a public plaza. He ran his hand over the rough, weathered brick of the main wall. It felt solid, permanent. This building had stood for 100 years. It had housed looms and laborers, seen the city rise and fall around it, and waited patiently for someone to recognize its strength. He felt a kinship with it. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He knew every square foot of it by heart. He knew the load-bearing walls, the soaring ceiling heights of the old weaving floor, the path the morning light would take through the vast, arched windows he planned to restore. He thought of Clara's words, a monument to failure. She was right, in a way. It was a monument, but it was not a monument to his failure. It was a monument to hers, a monument to her lack of vision, her arrogance, her willful blindness. It was a 200,000 square foot testament to the fact that she had never truly seen the man she was married to. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo he had taken a few weeks earlier. It was a picture of the final, signed contract with the Phoenix Group. The number, $4,400,000, was stated in clear, unambiguous terms. He had looked at this photo dozens of times over the past weeks, especially after a particularly cutting remark from Clara or her father. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the validation. It was the objective, third-party confirmation of the value he had created while they had been laughing at his hobby. A car pulled up to the gate, a sleek, black town car. A window rolled down and a man in a sharp suit, the CEO of the Phoenix Group, David Chen, leaned out. "Liam," he called out, a warm smile on his face. "Just wanted to see it one more time before the crews move in on Monday. It's magnificent, a real cornerstone." "It has good bones," Liam replied, smiling back. "Good bones and a great vision, thanks to you," Chen said. "The board is thrilled. We're already getting press inquiries about the Innovation Corridor's new anchor. You're going to be a star in the development world after this." He paused. "By the way, I saw the draft of the press release. It mentions you as the visionary who brought the project to us. Are you comfortable with that?" Liam considered it for a moment. His first instinct was to deflect, to remain in the background. It was his nature. But then he thought of Clara and Marcus. He thought of the word ambition. "Yes, David," he said, his voice firm. "I'm very comfortable with that. In fact, I'd appreciate it if you made sure that part was emphasized." "You got it," Chen said with a nod. "See you at the signing tomorrow? We'll make it official." "I have another signing tomorrow, actually," Liam said. "A more personal one, but I'll be thinking of this one." Chen gave him a knowing look, aware of the broad strokes of Liam's situation. "Well, good luck. Something tells me you'll handle it just fine." The car pulled away, leaving Liam alone again in the twilight, the quiet before the storm. He felt a sense of immense clarity. He wasn't just closing a chapter of his life. He was revealing a story that had been secretly written in the margins all along. Clara thought she was the author of this ending. She had no idea he was just letting her write the preface to his book. He took one last look at the magnificent old building, a silent promise passing between them, and walked back to his car. It was time. The conference room at Graves & Associates was a temple of adversarial commerce. The mahogany table was so polished it reflected the grim, determined faces around it like a dark mirror. At the head sat Mr. Graves, Clara's lawyer, his posture radiating the smug satisfaction of a battle already won. Clara sat to his right, a vision in ivory silk, her expression a careful blend of solemnity and relief. To her right, Marcus Thorne was an immovable mountain of patriarchal authority, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Liam with an air of final judgment. The tableau was complete, the triumphant princess, the victorious king, and the vanquished court jester. Liam and his lawyer Arthur sat opposite them, the expanse of polished wood between them feeling like a vast, unbridgeable chasm. Arthur fidgeted with his pen, the tension in the room palpable to him. He had argued with Liam for an hour that morning, pleading with him to renegotiate, to fight for a more equitable split. "It's financial suicide, Liam," he'd insisted. Liam had simply shaken his head, his calm infuriating even to his own counsel. "Trust me, Arthur. Just follow the plan." "If everyone is ready," Mr. Graves began, his voice unctuous and smooth, "we can execute the final documents. The agreement is straightforward. Mrs. Thorne receives the 4 North Elm properties, their assets and income, free and clear. Mr. Davies receives the Ashworth property, its assets and liabilities." He practically spat the last word. A clean break, as all parties wished. He slid the signature page across the table. It came to a stop directly in front of Liam. 4 pairs of eyes zeroed in on him. Clara leaned forward slightly, her blue eyes glittering with anticipation. This was the moment. The final, formal severing of her ties to this man and his embarrassing lack of ambition. She couldn't resist one last parting shot, a final twist of the knife disguised as pity. "I truly hope it works out for you, Liam," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "I hope you and your pile of bricks will be very happy together." Marcus chuckled softly, a low, guttural sound of approval. Liam looked at her. He held her gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He saw the flicker of irritation in her eyes. His silence was denying her the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. He then looked at the pen beside the document. He picked it up, feeling its cool, metallic weight in his hand. He uncapped it. And then he did something no one in the room expected. He set the pen down. He did not sign. Instead, he reached down to the worn leather briefcase at his feet. The clicks of the latches opening were unnaturally loud in the silent room. Clara frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Marcus uncrossed his arms, a hint of impatience in the movement. Liam didn't produce a rival legal document or a last-minute injunction. He pulled out a magazine. It was the latest issue of Metropolis Business Journal, the city's most respected financial publication. It was a glossy, substantial magazine, and he opened it to a page he had dog-eared. Without a word, he slid it across the mahogany table. It glided smoothly over the polished surface, coming to a stop directly in front of Clara. She stared at it, bewildered. "What is this?" she asked, her tones sharp with annoyance. "Liam, this is not the time for games." "I think you'll find it relevant," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. "Page 42. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. With a flick of her wrist, she turned the magazine around. Marcus leaned over her shoulder to look. Mr. Graves, sensing an unforeseen complication, stood up slightly to get a better view. On page 42 was a full-page feature article. The headline was printed in bold, attention-grabbing letters. "The Phoenix Rises. Tech giant announces $300 million Southern Corridor campus, anchored by historic Ashworth building." Below the headline was a stunning, digitally rendered image. It showed the Ashworth building, but not as they knew it. It was a gleaming hub of glass and restored brick, surrounded by a vibrant public plaza. It was futuristic yet classic, a masterpiece of adaptive reuse. It was the image from Liam's mind, now printed for the entire city to see. Clara's face went slack. The smug confidence drained away, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. Her eyes scanned the text, her brain struggling to process the words. Visionary redevelopment plan. Key architectural linchpin. Spearheaded by local architect Liam Davies, who recognized the site's hidden potential. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked at Liam, then back at the magazine, then at her father, whose face had become a stony mask of shock. "What is this?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. This is a proposal, a fantasy." "It's not a proposal, Clara," Liam said, his voice as calm and steady as a heartbeat. He reached back into his briefcase. This time he pulled out a thick, spiral-bound document with a pristine white cover. He placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "This is the executed sales contract, finalized 3 weeks ago." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment, a quiet bomb that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. "The Phoenix Group, as the article states, has acquired the property," he continued, his tone becoming that of a lecturer addressing a particularly slow class. "They needed a flagship for their new Innovation Corridor campus. The Ashworth building, with its robust structure and prime location relative to the new transit line, was the perfect fit." He finally looked directly at Marcus. "You called it a foundation of bricks and pigeon droppings. The Phoenix Group's structural engineers called it an irreplaceable example of superior industrial construction." He then turned his gaze back to Clara. Her face had gone from confused to pale, a sickly, chalky white. "You called it a monument to failure," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. "David Chen, the CEO of Phoenix, called it the cornerstone of their billion-dollar regional expansion." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. He could see the frantic calculations happening behind Clara's eyes, the desperate attempt to reconcile the reality he was presenting with the one she had so carefully constructed. "And you were worried about my income," he said, delivering the final, devastating blow. He opened the cover of the bound contract to the final page, where the purchase price was listed in large, clear type. He turned it around for them to see. Purchase price, $4,400,000. $4,400,000. The number seemed to leap off the page. A collective gasp went through the room. Arthur, his own lawyer, stared at the document, his mouth agape. He looked at Liam with a newfound sense of awe. Mr. Graves sank back into his chair as if his legs had given out. Clara made a small, choking sound. "No," she breathed. "No, you hid this. This is fraud. You hid an asset." The accusation, born of pure panic, was exactly what Liam had anticipated. It was the desperate lashing out of a cornered animal. Mr. Graves, her own lawyer, was the one to unwittingly deliver the fatal blow to her argument. He cleared his throat, his face ashen. "Clara," he said, his voice strained, when was this sale finalized?" "The funds were transferred to my new corporate account 2 days ago," Liam answered calmly. "The contract was executed 3 weeks ago. However," he added, looking directly at Clara, "the asset division agreement, in which you, on record, explicitly devalued and relinquished all claims to the property, was agreed upon by both parties 6 weeks ago." He let the legal reality sink in. "You didn't just give it to me, Clara. You insisted I take it. You called it a liability you wanted no part of. You put it on the legal record. You couldn't have been more clear." The room fell into a stunning, absolute silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Clara stared at the contract, then at Liam. The triumphant queen was gone. In her place was a woman staring into the abyss of a mistake so colossal, so utterly devastating that her mind could barely comprehend it. She had not just lost a negotiation. She had, with her own arrogance as the primary weapon, engineered her own financial ruin. The pile of bricks she had mocked was a mountain of gold she had handed him for free. The game was over. Checkmate. The silence in the room stretched into an eternity. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with the wreckage of Clara's arrogance. Her face, moments before so radiant with victory, had collapsed. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a waxy, translucent pallor. Her mouth was slightly open, as if she had forgotten how to close it. The only movement was a slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. Marcus was frozen, a statue of disbelief. His entire worldview, a rigid structure built on the premise that he was always the smartest man in any room, had been dynamited. He wasn't looking at the contract anymore. He was staring at Liam, but he wasn't seeing his former son-in-law. He was seeing a reflection of his own catastrophic failure of judgment. He, Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, had encouraged his daughter to throw away a multi-million-dollar asset. He had laughed at the man who was orchestrating the deal. The humiliation was so profound, it was paralyzing. It was Clara who broke first. The shock curdled into pure, desperate rage. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, the sound tearing through the quiet room. She lunged across the table, her hands reaching for the sales contract as if destroying the paper could undo the reality it represented. "This is our money! Mine!" Mr. Graves, startled into action, quickly intercepted the document, pulling it out of her reach. "Clara, stop!" he commanded, his voice sharp. "It's fraud!" she screamed, turning on Liam, her eyes wild. "You tricked me! You deliberately hid this from me!" Liam remained perfectly still in his chair, his calmness a stark contrast to her hysteria. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The facts were his weapons, and they had already found their mark. "I hid nothing, Clara," he said, his voice measured and clear. "I bought a property you despised. I spent 2 years researching its potential while you were ridiculing my hobby. I took a risk you were unwilling to even consider. The fact that the risk paid off is a result of my work, not your assets." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the list of grievances, not as an attack, but as a simple statement of cause and effect. "For 10 years, he began, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "you and your father have treated me as something less than an amusing project that didn't pan out. You dismissed my profession, you belittled my interests, and you fundamentally misunderstood my character. You valued appearances above all else." He looked from Clara to Marcus. "You saw a dilapidated building. I saw a cornerstone of urban renewal. You saw a quiet man. You failed to understand that quietness is not weakness. It is the environment where strategy grows. You offered me $50,000 to disappear," he said, his eyes locking with Marcus's. The older man flinched, the memory of his arrogant offer now a source of burning shame. "A safety net," Clara called it. "A kindness." "This," Liam said, gesturing to the contract in Mr. Graves's hand, "is my safety net, one I built myself." Clara's rage suddenly collapsed, imploding into panic desperation. The fight went out of her, replaced by the dawning, terrifying realization of her new reality. The 4 rental units, which had seemed like a kingdom just minutes before, now felt like a pittance. Their income would be substantial, yes, but it was nothing compared to the life-altering fortune she had just thrown away. "Liam," she pleaded, her voice cracking, changing registers from a shriek to a desperate whisper. "Liam, please, we can fix this. We can tear up the agreement. We can split it. It's only fair. We were married." The reversal was complete. The conquering queen was now a beggar, pleading for scraps from the table of the man she had just tried to ruin. The dramatic irony was so potent it was almost poetic. "Fair?" Liam repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "Was it fair when you announced our divorce to your parents before you had the decency to speak to me? Was it fair when you mocked my work in front of your friends? Was it fair when you called this building a monument to failure and declared you wanted nothing to do with it?" He shook his head slowly, not with anger, but with a profound, unshakable finality. "The time for fairness as you define it is over. You made your choice, Clara. You were very clear about what you wanted and what you didn't want. You wanted the safe, polished assets. You didn't want the risk. You didn't want the pile of bricks. You cannot, in good faith, lay claim to the rewards of a risk you refuse to take. Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. It was David Chen, the CEO of the Phoenix Group. It was perfect. A happy coincidence he could leverage for a final, theatrical flourish. He answered the call and put it on speaker. "David," he said, "I'm in a meeting. Is everything all right?" "Better than all right, Liam." David's enthusiastic voice filled the silent room. "The press release just went live. My phone is blowing up. Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, everyone wants to talk to the architect with the golden touch. They love the story, the underdog who saw what no one else could. You're a legend, my friend. We're issuing the official check at the press conference on Monday. A big one, for $4.4 million. We want you right there beside us." Liam glanced at Clara. Her face was a mask of horror. Hearing the number spoken aloud by a third party, hearing the confirmation of his new status, was like a physical blow. "I'll be there, David," Liam said. "Thank you." He ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. The sound of David Chen's voice, brimming with respect and admiration for Liam, echoed in the funereal silence of the room. It was everything Clara and Marcus had denied him, now being broadcast for them to hear. "So," Liam said, turning back to the original divorce document, the one that now seemed like a relic from another lifetime. He picked up the pen once more. "As I see it, this agreement is exactly as we all wanted it. Clara gets the stable, manageable properties she understands. And I," he paused, then signed his name with a firm, confident stroke, "will keep my pile of bricks." He capped the pen and stood up. "Arthur," he said to his stunned lawyer, "I believe we're done here." He turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. He didn't need to see Clara's tears or Marcus's stunned face. He could feel their world shattering behind him. He walked out of the cold, sterile office and into the bright afternoon sun, a free man. The quiet, underestimated architect had just completed his masterpiece. The aftermath of the revelation was not a clean explosion, but a slow, messy demolition. In the immediate moments after Liam walked out of the room, a stunned silence gave way to a toxic storm of blame. "How could you let this happen?" Clara shrieked at her lawyer, her voice raw with disbelief and rage. "You were supposed to protect me. You were supposed to do your due diligence." Mr. Graves, pale and shaken, could only state the cold, hard truth. "Clara, I advised you to consider a more equitable split. You and your father were adamant. You signed a document explicitly stating the Ashworth building was valued at $120,000 and that you relinquished all claims to it. My hands were tied by my client's own instructions." His words offered no comfort, only confirmation of her own folly. Her fury then turned, as it always did, to the man who had always been her backstop, her enabler. "Daddy, do something!" she cried, turning to Marcus. But Marcus Thorne was a broken statue. He sat slumped in his chair, staring at the polished table, seeing nothing. The confident, booming patriarch was gone. In his place was an old man who had been publicly and comprehensively outmaneuvered. He had been so blinded by his own prejudice against Liam's quiet nature that he had actively coached his daughter into making the worst financial decision of her life. The $50,000 bribe he had offered Liam now seemed like a sick joke, a symbol of his own spectacular ignorance. "There's nothing to be done," he mumbled, his voice a hollow echo of its usual authority. "He beat us." The admission, coming from him, was more devastating to Clara than anything else. It was a concession of defeat from a man she had considered invincible. The world as she knew it had been turned upside down. The weak were strong, the smart were foolish, and all the money and status they had wielded like weapons had been rendered utterly useless. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing unraveling of the life Clara had so confidently constructed. The story, as such stories do in wealthy, insular communities, spread like wildfire. It wasn't the version from the Forbes article, which painted Liam as a visionary. The version whispered at country clubs and over brunch was far more salacious, and for the Thorns, far more damaging. It was the story of the arrogant heiress and her powerful father who had been so sure of their own superiority that they had literally given away a fortune. Clara, who had thrived on being the center of admiration, was now the object of pity and quiet ridicule. Her freedom brunch friends now spoke to her in hushed, sympathetic tones that barely concealed their schadenfreude. The invitations to exclusive events slowed to a trickle. She had become a cautionary tale. The financial pressure mounted almost immediately. The legal fees from the contentious divorce were substantial. More pressingly, Clara had, in her triumphant haste, taken out a significant line of credit against the North Elm properties to fund a lavish redecoration and a new luxury car. She had been operating on the assumption of a future unburdened by financial constraint. Now the income from the rentals, while steady, was not nearly enough to maintain the opulent lifestyle she felt was her birthright. Within 2 months, she was forced to make a humiliating decision. She had to sell one of the 4 townhouses. It was a public admission of her distress, a crack in the facade of Thorn invincibility. Marcus, his own reputation damaged by the affair, was forced to quietly buy it from her through a shell corporation to prevent the embarrassment of it going on the open market. It was a bailout, but it came with a heavy price. His relationship with Clara became strained, tainted by blame and disappointment. He looked at his daughter and saw not his brilliant heiress, but the architect of their family's public humiliation. Clara, humbled and desperate, attempted to contact Liam. The first few times, it was through angry texts and voicemails, accusing him of ruining her life. When those went unanswered, her tone shifted. She became pleading. She showed up at the temporary office he had leased downtown one afternoon, unannounced. Liam was at a large drafting table, sketching out plans for a new community center he was designing pro bono. He looked up, surprised to see her. She looked smaller, diminished. The designer clothes hung on her as if on a hanger. The fire in her eyes reduced to a dim ember. "Liam," she said, her voice soft. "Can we talk?" He put down his pencil. "Clara, what are you doing here?" I made a mistake," she said, the words costing her a visible effort. "A terrible mistake. I was arrogant. I was foolish. I let my father influence me. I wasn't thinking clearly." It was a confession, but it was riddled with excuses. It was still someone else's fault. "I miss you," she said, taking a step closer. "I miss us. We can start over. We can put this all behind us. The money, we can share it. We can build something new together." Liam looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of pity. Not for her financial loss, but for the poverty of her spirit. Even now, in what she thought was a moment of vulnerability, her primary motivation was the money. She wasn't trying to reconcile with the man. She was trying to reconcile with his bank account. "There is no us anymore, Clara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "That ended a long time ago, long before the lawyers got involved." "But I love you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Liam suspected they were real tears, but they were tears of self-pity, not love. He shook his head slowly. "No, you don't. You don't even know me. You never did." He gestured around his office, at the blueprints, the books, the models. "This is me. This is what I do. This is what I love. And you called it a hobby. You called it a waste of time. The only thing that's changed is that my hobby now has a large number attached to it. Your feelings aren't for me, Clara. They're for the number." The truth of his words hung between them, undeniable. She had no response. The moral mirror he held up was too clear, the reflection too damning. "I wish you well, Clara," he said, turning back to his drafting table in a clear act of dismissal. "I truly do. I hope you find what you're looking for. But you won't find it here." She stood there for another moment, silent and defeated, before turning and walking away. As he heard her footsteps fade down the hall, Liam felt not triumph, but a quiet, somber sense of closure. The final, decaying piece of his old life had just been cleared away. Now the real building could begin. 6 months after the signing, the city's southern corridor was a hive of activity. The skeleton of the old Ashworth building was now draped in scaffolding, a cocoon from which something new and beautiful was emerging. Cranes dotted the skyline like giant steel birds, and the sounds of construction were the sounds of a neighborhood being reborn. At the center of it all was Liam Davies. He hadn't become the flashy, arrogant mogul that Marcus Thorne would have been in his position. He had founded Davies Chen Development, a partnership with the Phoenix Group, but his approach remained the same: quiet, methodical, and vision-driven. He didn't buy a fleet of luxury cars or a sprawling mansion. He bought a modest, beautifully designed loft in a converted warehouse not far from his flagship project, a space that valued light, form, and function over ostentatious display. His firm quickly gained a reputation not for ruthless acquisition, but for thoughtful, community-oriented development. He took on projects others deemed too difficult or not profitable enough: restoring a historic theater, designing a mixed-income housing unit, creating a public park from a polluted brownfield site. The $4.4 million was not a treasure to be hoarded, but a foundation upon which to build something of lasting value. His ambition, which Clara and Marcus had so fatally misjudged, was not for wealth, but for worth. He rarely thought of Clara. When he did, it was with a distant, clinical sadness. He heard through Arthur that she had sold a second rental unit and had moved into a smaller, less fashionable apartment. She was living a life that was, by most standards, still very comfortable, but for her it was a public downfall. She had lost the one thing she truly valued: the appearance of success. Whether she had learned anything from the experience, he didn't know. He hoped she had, but he understood that some structures are too compromised to be saved. They can only be demolished and rebuilt from scratch. Marcus Thorne had retreated from public life. He stepped down as chairman of the museum gala, citing health reasons. He was seen less frequently at his club. The story of his spectacular misjudgment had tarnished his carefully polished legacy. He, a man obsessed with judging the worth of others, had been revealed to have no judgment at all. It was a poetic justice so fitting that Liam could find no pleasure in it, only a sense of tragic inevitability. The man's fatal flaw had led, as it always does, to his downfall. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam stood on a viewing platform overlooking the Ashworth site, now officially the Phoenix campus. David Chen stood beside him, both men wearing hard hats, looking at the progress below. "It's going to be magnificent," David said, his voice filled with genuine excitement. "More than just a building, it's a statement, a symbol of what's possible when you look past the surface." Liam nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "That's what architecture is all about, isn't it? Seeing the potential that's locked away inside." He thought about the long, difficult journey that had brought him to this place. The years of quiet work, the sting of condescension, the lonely nights spent planning and dreaming. He had never sought revenge. He had only sought to build. The vindication was simply a byproduct of staying true to his own vision, of honoring his own worth when no one else would. He had learned that true strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's patient, it's strategic, and it builds on foundations of integrity and hard work. He had learned that you cannot let others define your value. Their yardsticks are often flawed, their vision limited. You must carry your own, and you must have the courage to trust it, even when you're the only one who can see the blueprint. The world is full of people who will judge you based on what they see on the surface. They'll look at your quietness and call it a lack of ambition. They'll look at your patience and call it weakness. They'll look at your passion project and call it a pile of bricks. But what this story teaches us is that the most powerful things are often built in silence, away from the judging eyes of the world. True worth is not in the applause you receive, but in the integrity of the thing you are building. It's a reminder to trust your vision, even when you're the only one who sees it. What do you think? Was Liam's justice perfect, or should he have been more forgiving? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective makes this community what it is. And if you found this story of patience and vindication satisfying, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Thank you for being here, and remember to keep building, especially when no one is watching.